Well, thank you everyone for joining the
No.
March NHA Best Practices call. As you guys hopefully all know, because you have made it today, we're going to be focusing on advocacy and advocating for national heritage areas today. Obviously, a bit of a timely subject given where we are in the federal budgeting process right now. So I know we have a smaller group today, and I don't think either of our presenters are planning on sharing slides. So I think we can keep this like a really participatory discussion. We do only have two presenters today, so we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and also for folks on this call to share what they do to advocate for their national heritage areas at the federal level as well as local. So I will kick things off just by introducing our presenters. First, we'll have Sara from Niagara Falls National Heritage Area, who I believe everyone on this call is well familiar with. And then we'll have Chris from the Maritime Washington National Heritage Area, which is my national heritage area, both speaking a little bit about how they advocate for NHAs, kind of the benefits and the challenges of that work, the nuts and bolts of developing relationships, preparing effective materials, and really how you can just make the most of your meetings, of your time, of your community.
May have had Alex freeze. Did Alex freeze for the rest of you, or did I freeze?
She did.
Oh, okay. it may be that Alex froze. So hopefully she's working on that. But I'll just jump in. I don't think there's a whole lot more introductions that are necessary. It looks like Alex is going to jump in and jump off and jump back in here. But I think Sara, we should go ahead and dive right in with things.
Sure. I'm happy to do so. So, hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. It's nice to see everyone. I know that today is the topic is advocacy. And when Alex reached out to me, I said, of course, yes. And then I started to think about when I became connected to the National Heritage Area in Niagara Falls, and my first days as an advocate and the lessons that I've learned along the way. So I thought I would share a few of those with you. And first and foremost, I think there's so many people taking that advocacy role in terms of also representing your organization can be challenging. It's hard to find your voice. It's hard to find the way forward in talking about what your organization is doing, but also making that ask. And at the time I became executive director, there wasn't anybody to teach me. So I've only learned fully on the ground running. And then that led into also when I became chair of the Alliance, we had to build a lot of relationships from scratch because it was just a difficult time. So first and foremost, my number one rule of thumb for advocacy is to tell an authentic story and follow it with an ask. For national heritage areas, very specifically, it's an invitation to my legislators to come and experience a project or program that we're doing. And then share that impact and follow that with any ask that you may have. So on the Alliance side of that, right now, our major advocacy push is appropriations. And in appropriations, we're asking for $33.5 million. Well, how did we get there? We got there by saying this is what we need to support this Heritage Partnership Program, which is all 62 national heritage areas. But we tell that story through not only an economic impact,
monthly best practices.
Every federal dollar is matched by $5.50 of non-federal dollars, but it's also telling what I call the social impact of your programs. There is not another program I know of where people, especially when we use the word taxpayers, can experience the direct impact of their dollars as they do through the National Heritage Area. And so they can actually participate, constituents can participate and shape what national heritage areas do because we work in public-private partnerships. And that message carried And so then when we go in and we ask, and this will be a really good example, for that $33.5 million, we're asking to support programs and projects in the, counties, places that our constituents, where constituents live, where constituents are experiencing trails, where where they are experiencing programs at historic sites. And that is a really, really important piece. I did want to also just talk about challenges that have been along the way. So from the Alliance perspective, one of the biggest challenges that we faced early on was what I refer to as the Hunger Games period of time, where heritage areas were pitted against each other in terms of appropriations. So instead of looking at it as how the existing amount of appropriations was going to support everybody, and then divided up and pitted each of us against each other, it was important for us to move forward and unite and say, why don't we ask for more money so that everybody benefits? And so to be unified and have a unified message when you go into your legislator's office is really, really critical. When I confront a less than enthusiastic legislator, my mindset is always, this is an opportunity to educate. Advocacy is an opportunity to educate anyone, a partner, legislators, you name it, about the work that you're doing. And if you're passionate about your work, that's going to be expressed in that message. The why has to come out. Why do you want that legislator to support your work? And so the opportunity to educate is, again, bringing people into your backyard, to your programs, to your projects, and expressing, not only the impact economic and socially, but then also making that ask right after. I'm going to pause for a minute. I know that Alex said this was a little less formal, but I didn't know if anybody had any questions before I just went on for another minute or two. And take a deep breath. I hope I didn't freeze.
You're good, Sarah. Hopefully I'm not freezing again.
Okay.
I did have one follow-up question on something
Yeah.
I am getting that your internet is unstable, so who knows? But I did have one question on something you mentioned. You talked about inviting legislators out to your events. Could you give a few examples of different events or programs that you've invited folks to?
Sure. So one of our biggest projects in our backyard that we initiated was the Discover Niagara Shuttle. We run a hop-on, hop-off transportation service that didn't exist prior to 2016. And so one of the early advocacy actions that we took was to invite legislators out to actually ride that shuttle, to experience the route, to experience the sites along the route, and then to talk about why that was important. The first legislator who actually rode the shuttle was Representative Chris Collins, who was, later indicted. But he was our representative, and he was on the shuttle, and he, would have been considered a very reluctant supporter of national heritage areas, but by riding the shuttle immediately afterwards, he was one of the first people to sign on to our increase in appropriations request because he experienced it. So making sure that when you invite people out that they're experiencing a project also means that you're also surrounding them with their constituents. So it wasn't just me and Representative Collins. It was a busload of local legislators that were on it as well. So it was our county legislators, it was our state representatives, and then it was partners, partner sites that were being impacted directly by our work. And I think that that is another important piece. For advocacy, it's not just that direct one-on-one with your legislators, you representing the organization, your board members representing the organization, and directly speaking to legislators. It's actually utilizing your partners to speak on your behalf so that they see a greater coalition. So that's one example, Alex. Another example, and this is something that we just recently did in our heritage area, we also built and we operate the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center. And we offer as a very specific tour there called the Freedom Conversations Tour, which talks about the legacy of enslavement in communities today through the lens of the Underground Railroad. And we invite legislators to come and participate in that tour. We ask them to invite either their staff or other people. We give them, 10 free complimentary tickets to say, invite who you'd like to join you in this tour to be part of that conversation. And when that conversation happens and that dialogue starts happening, you can see the energy going around the room. And then as they leave, we ask them to challenge another legislator to come and participate in that tour. And on the way out, as I walk out, if there's an advocacy ask, I thank them for attending, and then I remind them of what the advocacy ask was or is. And so I think that for them to come out and see the work that you're doing and be influenced by the partners that are in the room, not just you and your board members, is really important.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Alex, I don't know what else you'd like me to share.
I think you covered a lot of the questions that we went through, but if there's anything else that you'd like to speak to before we turn things over to Chris, and then we can kind of open it up for discussion with the group.
I don't think so. I think I've covered as much as I can. I can turn to Chris and I can always go back.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Great, thanks very much. As Alex mentioned earlier, I'm Chris Moore. I'm Executive Director with the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, and I have Maritime Washington in my tagline there because the NHA is a program of the Washington Trust. We're a statewide nonprofit advocacy organization that's been doing preservation work for getting close on to 50 years now. And so it was originally when Alex said, "Do you want to talk about advocacy?" I was like, "The NHA folks do advocacy so well. Why are we doing this?" But it's always good to talk about it and go through, I think, some of the specifics. And I will say I've been going to DC for 18 years now in my role with the Washington Trust to lobby specifically on preservation issues, and now more recently NHA issues as well. And you all could not have a better leader on this front than Sara. And I know a lot of you have been around for the last few years when the programmatic legislation went through. That would not have happened without all of you. It would not have happened without Sara. And I think the number one thing is that's why it's important to build these relationships with legislators. And that's really the key to all of this is it is building a relationship. And we would not have been where we are today if we didn't have some rock solid relationships with legislators, not just in any one particular region, but literally across the board. And that's so key. And I'll hit on a couple of those things. I'm going to kind of just I think Sarah's done a fantastic job of all of that foundation. I want to kind of just go through some real specifics that we think about and that we do when we engage in these meetings. But I mentioned that need to build relationships. A lot of it is about trust, right? Why do you build relationships with anybody? So it's about trust, it's about credibility. And I think one of the things that's really important is you have to remember both staffers who are key to the whole advocacy experience. It's not just the member themselves, but staffers are actually really the key to all of this. They deal with so much over the course of a year and all the different issues. And you'll hear them, you might get referred to one staffer over another because that staffer has heritage in their portfolio. And you ask them what their portfolio is, and it might be interior, park service, heritage, housing, agriculture. It's this whole broad, wide net of issues. And I say all that because when you go to them to talk about the NHAs, if you've established a relationship, they know about that, but staffers turn over quickly and they don't always know. You want to be the content expert. You want to be the person that they go to when there is a question that comes up or something about NHAs or, hey, I heard about this. You want to be the person for your districts, for your members, and especially your staffers that they can call, that they have that they have your number. So that's really one of the key reasons I see for advocacy, not just on a specific issue, which of course is important, but also in that kind of holistic approach, the overall year-long approach. This is not a one-time, hey, let's go to DC and see you one time. It is over the course of the whole year. So really becoming that content expert for your congressionals is really important. So when and how we meet with federal electeds, just like the NHA does, and Alex was there this year, which is great. The preservation organizations also have their lobby day. And one of the things that I talk to everyone about when they're going to advocate, whether it's their first time or multiple times, there's a if you've gone, there's a gravitas about being in DC. There's something really, I think, so I've been doing it for 18 years, and every year I still feel the same thing. There's something really special about being there and knowing all of the things that go on. I mean, that can be intimidating. So what I always tell folks is, remember, if you're meeting with a member particularly, these folks get elected for a reason. They get elected because they're personable, they're charming, they know how to talk to people. And so, dive into that. I think really at the end of the day, especially if you're a constituent, they do want to hear from you. They generally do. This is not, may sound trite, and there's so much noise around what's happening all the time, not just now in particular, but they really do want to hear from you and know what's going on. So don't ever go in cynical about things, because they really do want to know. And the other thing we always talk to folks about as you're doing this, and again, this is applicable for the whole year, not just that one day or one couple of days that you're in DC, is really don't go in with any preconceived political notions about anything. I think one through line that is important to remember in all this work that we do is it is bipartisan. This work is important to both sides of the aisle. I think if you look over the last couple of years at some of the success around getting legislation through in a really difficult legislative climate, and about getting funding, NHAs for FY24 were funded at 29.5 million again, which was level funding from last year. And what we're hearing from everyone, and Sara can probably testify to this as well, that's a win. To be at level funding in FY24 from FY23 was a real win this year. And so our issues are bipartisan, and they're important to people on both sides of the aisle. And you don't want to bring those politics. And despite, people will have really strong political feelings one way or another on a variety of issues. Don't bring those into the meeting, right? The meeting is about the NHA and about how this is important to the district, to the region, to the economy, all those good things. So that's really good. In terms of the information, I mean, Sara talked about that really well, that impact, there's nothing that's better than talking about impact and bringing those personal stories home so that you can have a very specific story from their district, and maybe one that is connected to them as well. If you can do a little bit of research or homework about what they might be into or different events they've attended, and appeal to that. So trying to find some of those connections. I think the other piece that comes out of it, I was kind of trying to double up on a couple of my bullet points here, but oftentimes when you go, and this is whether you are lucky enough to have a meeting with a member or you get a staffer, you get 15 minutes, right? Like 15 minutes oftentimes is what you have. And so in that 15 minutes, how do you get your message across? What's the best way to do it? If you are lucky enough to be in the district of the member, that's really great. And I think for a lot of us have NHAs that probably overlap multiple districts. So, but that's great. If the NHA is within their district, that's fantastic. And being able to if it's ever possible to, if you personally are not a constituent, if it's ever possible to bring a board member or to bring one of your partners who runs programs or experiences within your NHA, to have them come along and be able to be a constituent, that's really helpful. Not necessary, but really, really helpful. When you get into those meetings, I think there are two things that, a few things you want to keep in mind. Try not to get into the weeds too much. There may be a member or a staffer who asks some follow-up questions on things, but I say that because, again, you don't want to assume that they know what your issue is about. So it's really a brief description of, hey, have you ever been to my NHA? Do you know about the NHA program? If no, a real brief, real quick primer, and then can move into the impact piece, and then finally into the request. What I always say, no matter what happens, make sure that before you leave that meeting, you have looked the staffer or the member in the eye and said, we are asking for, fill in the blank. You got to come out of that meeting with a request. Otherwise, they don't know why you're there. They expect a request. They anticipate it. And you're not going to get an answer necessarily. You might get some nodding and writing down of notes, but it's important to make that request. So just real quickly, I wanted to share a few of the materials that we bring when we go into meetings. And I think the preparation is really important on this front. So for instance, just this year when Alex was out in DC, a real quick, what is our year one for us? 2023 represented our first fully operational year as an NHA, and we're really, really thrilled about the impact and work that Alex and her team have done. Carson is on this call. He is a new team member with us at the Maritime Washington NHA as well, and there's just been some fantastic work that has taken place. So, just a quick year one highlights, high level stuff, right? This is not getting into the weeds. And then this one was specific to the 6th district. Many of you know, Maritime Washington NHA is 3,000 miles of coastline. So we hit, I should have this committed to memory, 6 districts, whatever it is, it's multiple districts. I highlighted the 6th district because the entire 6th district is within the NHA. And so, you highlight some of those things that speak directly to that member. This happens to be Representative Derek Kilmer, who has been a great friend to preservation and to NHAs. He's really important because he sits on the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee in House Appros. So, really, really key person for our issues. And so we want to make sure that he knows everything that's going on and how this is impacting his district. I am very, very saddened to say Derek is not running for re-election, which is too bad, but he will be back in Washington State, and I know doing good work here. But that's a tough spot to fill. You've got someone on Interior Approach who is an ally and advocate for you. So that is important to understand as you have these meetings, what committees members are on and where their role is in terms of committee work and priorities and decision making and leadership within the House and within the Senate, respectively. So, this is just a quick 2-pager that goes over that. And then I know this was accompanied as well with the specific request that we had for FY25 funding, the $33.5 million. I'm going to share, let's see, here's my other piece. When we go to Preservation Advocacy Week, it's very similar to what we do with NHAs, and I'm just using Derek Kilmer again as an example. But this just give you guys a little bit of a peek into what happens in other places. Same exact thing. We take when we go for preservation overall, we work to meet with all 10 offices in the House. Washington is 10 districts, so we have 10 House members and both senators, and we do try to get meetings with every one of them. So it's 12 meetings that we have in a single day. So we have a group of usually between 10 to 12 folks who come out with us, which is probably another discussion. But So we again look at what's happening in District 6 with preservation writ large. And then we have some very specific prepared. When we go for Preservation Week, it's done by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and state and tribal historic preservation officers. And here's our list. Our request is $225 million from the Historic Preservation Fund, which, like the Heritage Partnership Program, is a line item in the Park Service budget. So you're speaking directly to a program area. It outlines that we've got, it's just specific details. This is all stuff that's prepared by Preservation Action, which is kind of the lobbying wing of the preservation movement. And then, these are all, there is some legislative things that come in. If there is legislation, and this is an important piece to add, we might have our ask overall, but if there is legislation that's needed and important, that should be part of what we're doing. And we know it was when the programmatic bill was going through, but it's also something to think about within your own NHAs. Is there legislation out there that might be impactful for your own NHAs that is important to think about? So we have one-pagers on those sorts of things. And those are all the prepared pieces. We usually try and always have a one-pager on a specific project that highlights one of the topic areas we're talking about. So in this case, it was around historic tax credits. There might be a great one-pager of a program or project or National Register listing or rehabilitation that's happening in your NHA that you want to focus on. Again, it just gives some context around what is happening and how the programs impact economically and from a community standpoint. And then, of course, we included our Maritime Washington. So now I'm doubling up. We included our Maritime Washington work when we went back for Preservation Week. So for Derek Kilmer and some of the others who have whose district touches our NHA, they hear it from Alex when she goes back, and then they hear it again from me when I go back. So we kind of double dip from that standpoint. And there's nothing wrong with repeating requests. And then we've got some other interesting pieces of simple programmatic things we do. We run a youth program. This is just a one-pager letting them know. So let your people know about different programs happening in your area. This happens to be taking place within the Maritime Washington NHA as well. So again, another opportunity to kind of double dip. So I just wanted to kind of show those quickly in terms of the actual kinds of things we prepare. We always, it's that let people know what you're going to tell them, and then remind them what you told them. So we'll send that packet out as an email to the staff or ahead of time. We bring it as a printout and hand it to them in the meeting. And then ideally within a week afterwards, we always follow up with an email that emphasizes each of our requests, and we include the packet again. So they really get it three different ways. I think just the last thing I'll kind of touch on, and then certainly open it up for questions or thoughts, is that idea that outside of your visit to DC, how do you continue to communicate? And I think it's just really important to, again, from the standpoint of building the relationship and becoming that content expert, go-to person. It's great to go to DC, but you get 15 minutes, right? Half an hour if you're lucky. The real opportunity to have an impact is when they're in district. So that kind of year-long, know when the recess agenda is to the best that you can. The calendars are online. You can publicly look at the calendars for recess for senators and for the House, and get to know their in-district staff as well. The in-district staff, the ones who stay at home and aren't in DC, they do all the scheduling for when the member is home. And when they're home, they want to get out. They want to get out and see things. When you're a member of the House of Representatives, you're elected for 2 years, you are campaigning all the time. It doesn't stop. So when they're home, they want to go to projects that they can get connected to if they support NHA work and then they hear that this great thing happened, well, guess what? They can say, I support the NHAs and helped bring X number of dollars to my district and my community. So when you have those programs, if it's a ribbon cutting, if it's a special event, if it's a fundraisers are a little trickier. If it's a a ribbon cutting or opening, invite them. Their schedule, they won't come to everything, but as long as their scheduler knows, they will have you on the list, and it's a really great opportunity. Now, and this summer is going to be a perfect time because it's an election year. They're going to have a long summer recess. Get them out there. They will come. It'll be part of their campaign trip, but they'll also get a chance to see the work you're doing and see the constituency that you bring out for them. So that's really, really important. The other thing that I just wanted to emphasize, both for in meetings and for year-long correspondence, we go out to DC a lot, and most of the time we meet with staffers. That is not a bad thing. Don't ever take it personally if you don't get if you don't get a meeting with the member, rather you get a meeting with the staffer. They're really busy, especially when we go out there. It's budget time, it's appropriations time. In fact, when we were just there, we were there March 6th, just a few weeks ago, and we were sitting in the office of Representative Kim Schreier, who we actually don't. Our National Heritage Area is not in her district, but our friends from Mountains to Sound are on the line, and they are directly in her district. And we were in there talking with her staffer, watching the vote happen on the interior package that day. And it was literally on the TV. So we're able to sit there and talk directly about the issues that their boss was voting on right then. And we happened to be in there long enough that 15 minutes later, Representative Schreier actually came in and showed up and said, I just finished voting. So glad you guys are still here, and really took her time to meet with us. And we got to thank her for her vote, which funded NHAs, which funded preservation. And it was really, really important. But the staffers are the ones who do the work and get their information to their members. So don't discount what they do. I will leave it at that for right now, Alex. I'm happy that if questions come up, I think there's some local work that's outside of the federal level that is really interesting as well. But I want to take a pause and just open it up. If people have examples of great meetings they've had, or examples of horrible meetings that they walked out going, oh gosh, I just did the whole movement of this service. I think those are good to learn from. So happy to entertain questions or any conversation.
Like Chris said, I think we can open it up to questions from the floor now. It's a small enough group. Just feel free to come off mute. If you guys have questions for Chris and Sara about advocacy, or if you want to share tips and tricks that you've learned, I think the floor is open for all of that. I'd also love to hear some horror stories, Chris. That would be pretty fun if anybody has any.
I'll just comment, Alex, and thank you, Chris and Sara. As much as we've done this and done this and done this, it's always great to hear, it's always good to get the reinforcement and to hear it again and again. But thank you. It's encouraging. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Sara and Chris. And so since the Greenway NHA and Maritime NHA have some of the same legislators, Alex and I have been able to team up, and I think that has really benefited those meetings to show the unified front in like a really small amount. And I've also benefited learning from Alex and via Chris as well on like these templates for advocacy, since going to DC for me last year was the first time I had done in-person meeting with legislators advocacy, and I was super nervous. And so now I made like this template that's just one page that says like, hey, this is what you should cover. And I'd be happy to share that, especially if people have other staff who are like, advocacy is not for me, but really it's practice that makes you more comfortable. I would say I'm still really nervous each time I go, but the template and getting to work with Alex to say like, okay, you'll take this, I'll take this, and then we kind of go back and forth has really helped me. So I'm happy to share that as like a resource. I also love this idea of maybe doing this closer to the February. I feel like amped up. I'm like, I gotta go meet my senator. I gotta go do these meetings right now. So maybe we could do this again like in January or something like that.
I think that's a great idea. I'll put this on the agenda for next year's best practice calls. Because I know there was also some helpful information going around on the listserv right before we went, like, I can't remember who said that they brought letters of they brought like letters from their different partners with them talking about how great the NHA was. And I was like, oh, that was such a great idea. I wish I had thought of that earlier. So
We do that.
okay, great. That must have been you.
Silos and smokestacks. We often, when we have programs that we've supported, we ask the sites to communicate with congressional leaders and staffers about how the funds impact their organization or community. So,
Sara, would you talk a little bit about those of us with federal funds, the difference between advocating and asking for specific dollars?
So I can talk to that. So my approach, and this comes from, our advocacy seer, which is Alan Spears, is advocating on behalf of our programs, talking about what we're doing, right? And then to Chris's point, every single staffer is waiting for a request. So when you talk about that in terms of appropriations and you're an appropriate, they're going to say to you, what do you need? If you're not saying it. And so in those places that you feel like you're getting all your dollars from federal dollars, you might be crossing a line. Generally speaking, the staff comes and they'll say, what are you requesting? And that's your opportunity to say, we're requesting $33.5 million to support this program because that's supporting the work of Looking for Lincoln National Heritage Area. And so also being able to have your board members be able to do that and to speak one-on-one with legislators is also as helpful. Sara, did I answer that question?
Yeah, you did. I just know there's kind of a fine line.
There's a fine line. Alan's always recommended just to be able to, come out and say, this is what we're doing. And our program is being threatened by a 50% cut. Restoring our funding will allow us to be able to do X, Y, Z in our district, or in your district in the coming year. And that's not crossing the line.
That's a really good point. And I'd forgotten about how there's we all receive federal dollars and some may that may fund all of your operations. And so, yeah, really good point. I think that's another reason why if you can bring someone who is maybe a board member or again, is a partner, a programmatic partner, they're not being covered by federal dollars, so they can say whatever they want. And Sara, you can let me know if I'm going over the line with what Alan talks about, but I think other people can if you feel that you can't. So it is, and that advocating, of course, saying here's what the program's talking about, here's the reality of the current budget proposals. That's not advocating, that's informing and educating. And that's I think one of the key distinctions there. And just to follow up as well from Carolyn, if you can go in with, if you've got, I don't know that there are other NHAs that literally overlap the way we and Mountains to Sound do for a portion of our respective areas. But if you abut or even have someone that's in the same district or nearby, it's great to go in with 2 or 3 NHAs represented in one meeting. Number one, strength in numbers. Number two, they don't want to have separate meetings on the same issue. and that's a real thing. You don't want to waste their time. They're very busy, a lot's going on. So if you can streamline and say, hey, we've got 3 NHAs, we're all going to come talk to you and save you time, they're going to be happy about that. So it's a real bonus with it.
And just to echo what Chris just said, because I know a lot of national heritage areas do this, especially with their Senate delegation. Not everybody does it. And so it's really an opportunity, November, December to start working for New York State with my New York State heritage areas to say, what's a one pager we can put together? How can we coordinate our meetings with Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand in February? Who's going to be attending, who's not? Because to Chris's point, one meeting, they really respect one meeting versus having to schedule 4 meetings. And automatically it takes you to a different level with them. Because you're being mindful of their time and energy. I do think, going back to Sarah's question, informing and the opportunity to educate. You have to be mindful that not every staffer knows every item in a budget. They might not know that we've been zeroed out. They might not know that we've been cut in 50%. So it's almost like you raise it as an awareness just so that you're aware. Our program, was requested to have a 50% cut. This is what that would do for looking for Lincoln. If we were cut by 50%, this is what we would not be able to do. This is what we'd not be able to support. And another item that I'd just like to bring up to Chris's point is advocacy is a long game. It's a complete long game. We weren't successful overnight. It was building that coalition. It was building a unified message. But it was also building relationships with the staffers that go from, representing a House member to them becoming the senator's chief of staff. That's how much movement is happening in Congress. And I would also say that don't ever assume that the House is talking to the Senate. Ever, right? So it's always the same message has to be repeated over and over again. Don't assume that people are working together all the time, which is something we learned a little bit the hard way with our efforts with the Alliance, but really building those relationships with staff members is so crucial because they're going to remember their interactions with you no matter who they're serving, who they're working for. And how much they're promoted in the office. And that comes into value, especially when you get into moments like when we're passing the National Heritage Area Bill.
A real life example of that. I've met Representative Adam Smith, I think once. Maybe he's come to one meeting with us. Much of his district is in that, touches our national heritage area. But I've been going to his office for a number of years, and when we first started meeting, we met with the legislative assistants. And if that sounds like someone who's kind of low down on the list, yeah, they are. But that's okay. These are very smart young people who are very motivated and very excited to be doing what they're doing. This person happened to stay in that office so that by year 8, they were the legislative director. And we had gone every year. And the last couple of years, when we had a request to sign on for co-sponsorship or a request to sign on to a dear colleague letter for funding, I talked to Connor and he would write back, "Oh, yep, done, no problem." And that was like a one-day kind of email exchange because we had that relationship over 8-9 years. Sadly, Connor moved on. He's now working for one of the committees. So you got to start again. But it just goes to show you that it's important to build those relationships with every single person.
Mm-hmm. I know we've been talking a bit about, or a lot about meetings and how to make the most of those meetings. I was hoping to bring things back to what Sara was talking about at the beginning, which is how to build relationships or keep those relationships going outside of meetings through things like field visits and communication. And I just wanted to open things up to the floor to ask the other folks on this call, how do you maintain relationships with your elected officials outside of the DC meetings? I know John had an interesting idea in the chat that they invite Congress people out for recess. Which is also a great pun on their congressional recess as well.
Alex, I'll jump in and say a little bit more about it because I actually ran into that congressperson on Tuesday night at a totally different event, and she ran up to me. She's like, "Oh, I haven't been out in the Greenway in such a long time. We need to do that again." So, and I think it had been pre-pandemic was the last time we actually had recess with that congressperson. So, yeah, I'll just speak to in district is a nice time and place to do stuff, both and kind of building on Chris's point too. staffers are great. They're much easier to get to know. They have much easier schedules. And so we found that with a number of our Congress people in particular, but also our senators, we can send along invites to an event, but we try to make sure the staffers get to come. And if they're there, we try to make sure we acknowledge them. And it's just that include them in things, invite them to things, involve them in things. Sometimes they're only there for a year and then you start all over, but sometimes like Connor, he's there for a long time and he's great. So yeah, it's just that, just remember they are all people, and there's a lot of value in the outside of the ask. Just creating opportunities to see and spend time and talk and get to know with representatives and their staffers pays off when you need to talk to them or you need to ask for something.
And I think just to add to that, Alex, because I love all the materials that you've shared, and I've taken an approach just with our heritage area is, similar to like for-profit. What heritage areas ultimately have are portfolios of projects, right? And in that portfolio, every project should be listed by page that includes a description, includes partners, includes economic impact, includes the contribution of not only the federal dollars, but the non-federal dollars. And that's a really great way then to also provide a post follow-up or a random time of the year to say, this is an invitation to a ribbon cutting, but here, check out the project that we're doing with this one pager, or just to provide those updates so that you're not just seeing that person or that office once a year, that it's, on a quarterly basis. I have a little Post-it note, and this is from just when I started at Niagara Falls, which was in 2012, is, I asked myself, what can I do today to advocate for my organization? What can I do today? And what does that look like? Does that look like sharing a link onto our website? Does it look like sharing a post from social media? Does it look like making a call to a partner or to a legislator? But just taking that approach that advocacy is, 365, and it's not just one and done. It's ever-growing relationships, and providing updates. You might not get a response right away because we know how busy staffers are, but you can guarantee that they probably read it, because what we're doing is such incredible work and it's positive. It's positive, and they want the positives because we know that the environment, especially in DC, feels very heavy and it can feel very negative. And so what we're doing is actually creating lighthouses where they're like, oh, this is so cool. Look at what Maritime Washington is doing. I definitely want to spend more time talking about that than talking about, the border, climate crisis, any of the big heavies, right? And I think that that's where we have this incredible inroad and opportunity to share our stories.
Yes, very true. I love the idea of thinking about like we have a portfolio of projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Other examples of how folks maintain relationships with their electeds outside of Lobby Day or Advocacy Week?
This is Crystal Hitchings from Down East Maine, National Heritage Area. I'm in my car, so I have the video off. I don't know if it's because it's a smaller community, but over the years, we've been able to develop, long before the Heritage Area, somewhat personal relationship with two of our two senators, representatives, staff. And I've been inviting them to our management planning team meetings to listen in, and if they want to, and so far they have been. And yeah, so I don't know if that's unusual or not, but it just feels like they're almost like part of the community. So it feels normal, natural to.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, that actually is something that we did as well during our management planning. We had one representative who was really invested and often sent a representative to our steering committee for the management plan.
And Crystal, you've got a good advocate, supporter in Representative Pingree. She's great and is interested in all this stuff. I was so congratulations to you guys. I was so thrilled to see Down East Maine in there. I was hoping Knox County would be part of it, but you guys have a great area. So I'm really pleased to see that.
Give them time, perhaps they'll come in.
There we go.
And just a note, Crystal, I think that, you know, what's really special about it, I mean, we have to just remember this, is authorization bills are big, especially through the Natural Resources and the Energy and Natural Resources Committee on the Senate side, is those legislators planted a flag. They planted a flag, and they want to make sure that we are successful. If they are going to authorize a bill to designate a national heritage area, they want it to be successful. And so that's also part of the updates. They don't want their name on something that's going to fail, or that they're going to see in the newspaper for doing XYZ, which was not part of that core mission.
That's a really good point. Thank you. And all 4 of ours were very, very supportive.
Yes.
And keep them involved on a regular basis.
Yeah. So to pass an authorization bill, you have to have big believers. You have to have people that are willing to not only authorize, but also to understand the importance of appropriating, which you have those, right? Not just authorizing, but you're going to appropriate to support the management plan work. And they want it to be successful. Otherwise, they would not have done it. They would have sat on the sidelines and waited to see what would have happened.
Alex, can I just, I want to share one real last, just super nuts and bolts specific thing. And some of you may not be able to do this because of the federal funding, and that's okay. I can do it as executive director of the Washington Trust because in my role advocating, I'm not using federal funds. But I wanted to note that we are still it's a little later this year than normal, but we still are in that appropriations process. And as another follow-up to the asks or the request around funding for the NHA, many representatives, not all, I haven't found that all of Washington's delegation has this, but many do, where you can go online and also fill out the appropriations request form. And so I'm just going to real quickly, again, share this again is Representative Kilmer. I mentioned he's on Interior. He's on the Interior Subcommittee on Appropriations, but they have online. It's a way. I think this is really around access for their constituents to be able to go in, and you can go in and make your request. You fill it out. If you're an organization, you know, you can't do it as an individual. It does have to be from an organization, but you come in and select your appropriations and you can put that info in here, write a little detailed, you know, I've got it. I just copy and paste a detailed explanation of NHAs, what they do, our impact, the leveraging of federal dollars, and then specific the constituency in his district specifically, and these are broad reaching, you know, it's all kinds of folks that are impacted, so on and so forth. You can submit this, and it's another way for them to get this information. And so I encourage folks to take a look and see if any of their members have this, and if it's something that you are comfortable and can do without crossing that line. It's another way to get information into folks. You will see on here that Thursday, March 28th happens to be the deadline. So I'm not sure if this is still true or if it's going to get extended. I know, Sara, I think we're still waiting for some dear colleague letters for our 3.5 million request. The same is true on the preservation side for Historic Preservation Fund. We're still waiting for dear colleague letters. So this deadline may be somewhat fungible, but it is a programmatic request. And that's what the authorization Sara was talking about. Heritage Partnership Program, it's a program, it's authorized, and that's key. And you can make your case for why you should continue to fund this authorized program.
And in terms of just content of just filling that out, you know, the dear colleague letters that we post on the listserv, you just have to copy and paste from that. The language is all in there. So you don't have to create anything from scratch. As Chris said, that deadline is posted, but not only is the trust and others, we haven't been given the green light to move forward with the dear colleague letter.
Right.
I think that they're still trying to determine deadlines and they haven't been officially posted. I did send another email today asking for updates. It's definitely the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Like they probably are tired of asking hearing from me being like, are there any updates on this dear colleague letter? But I think that, you know, I don't like to think of like a communication and repeat communications as being a nuisance. It's just creating additional awareness for our program. So
Great. Well, we are just about out of time. Any last questions or comments? Okay, well, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely wrote down a whole list of ideas of how we can better advocate. And I know I'm already thinking of events that we can invite folks and staffers to in district. So hopefully everybody learned something new, got some fun new ideas. I know that this session really focused on advocating with federal electeds, but we're considering having a future NHA best practices about how to work with local elected officials and state officials as well. So keep an eye out for that in the future NHA best practices. And otherwise, I think we should be all set for today. Thank you guys all so much for joining us. I know the topic was announced a little last minute, so I appreciate everybody coming out. And thank you again to Chris and Sara for sharing all of their lessons with us. Hope everybody has a great rest of your day today and a good weekend.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.